Hey everybody, and welcome back for another review, and this time we'll be talking about Len Kaminski's Iron Man with issues 310 to 318. This is the end of it. This is the last wave of issues Kaminski's got. All in all, I think Kaminski has written about 41 issues of Iron Man, which is longer than John Byrne. It's not quite as long as O'Neill's 50-issue run. And I think it's actually a little bit longer than Michelini and Layton's individual runs, both their first and their second, but not combined. I think at this point, at least from how far I've read, Michelini and Layton have had the most issues on the book, but not consecutively. Consecutively would still probably be Dennis O'Neill. But yeah, I'm really sad this is ending. This has actually been some really, really great stuff all the way through, so it's sad that I don't have more Len Kaminski to talk about. But anyway, this is mostly the Hands of the Mandarin stuff. A majority of this particular wave of issues is about the Hands of the Mandarin arc, which is following up what happened during the opening stuff with Len Kaminski and with the end of John Byrne's stuff with the Dragon Seed saga. And it's a pretty big event for Iron Man, so it's got issues from Force Works, War Machine, Marvel Comics Presents, and the main Iron Man title. My issue, though, is the Marvel Comics Presents and the Force Works stuff are completely useless. If you just read the War Machine Iron Man issues back-to-back, you'll be fine. And everything else just feels like extra padding for extra fight scenes, and you could really just get away with only reading the Mandarin dialogue in any of this, because none of that stuff matters. It's really, really padded, and it's sad to say the Hands of the Mandarin just isn't a very good story all the way through, not because of the War Machine Iron Man stuff, but because of the way it's collected, and having to constantly break the narrative for these other tie-in issues that just don't matter. Other than that, though, it is a really interesting arc. You open it with the Mandarin, who's got his dragon claw hands now. He's got his hands on this thing called the Heart of Darkness, no relation to the Ghost Rider Heart of Darkness. And to channel its power, he has to fight his inner demons. And in fighting his inner demons, he battles the previous versions of himself through all of his incarnations, all of his costumes, and all of his major flaws. And it's actually a really good parallel to what Tony's been doing with like battling his past demons and battling stuff like alcohol and War Machine, and kind of getting back into a more focused mindset. And it's even more interesting because Tony's got like a fractured personality, because there's the Tony Stark character, there's the Anthony Stark persona that does business, and then there's the Iron Man persona that saves the world. And to kind of have a fractured person dealing with and grasping whether they're more man or machine, or who they really are, while their reverse villain has just consolidated himself, is really interesting. And at this point, after the Vortex stuff, after Vortex drank alcohol and Tony got drunk and he's fighting War Machine drunk, Tony's losing himself more and more, and Mandarin's getting more and more together. And it's really great that all that actually feeds into this conflict that the two have. War Machine and Iron Man patch things up really quickly, which is a problem in the sense that, well, they were fighting for so long, and War Machine's going around doing all of this political stuff which isn't in his jurisdiction, and Tony can't support any of that, and now they're just friends again, and that's kind of awfully brief. But then at the same time, the whole War Machine Iron Man thing just has friction just hasn't been working. So it's really great that they finally have wrapped all of that up. There's actually kind of a nice touching moment where the two of them are just looking at each other and they kind of laugh because they understand that they've been acting silly, and I do like that. And so that makes me think that maybe it was a Marvel mandate that these two be split up as opposed to a Len Kaminski thing. So that's there. And then the big thing about this story, the big important thematic stuff to talk about is the nature of technology. Because the Mandarin wants to push things back to the way they were with the Chinese dynasties. And Iron Man is saying that you can't halt progress. And he's got this anti-technology field so the Mandarin can kind of assume control and everyone kind of resorts to feudal lifestyles. And the really interesting thing that that Kaminski is able to talk about is, well, what is technology really? Because the Mandarin's got like this abstract concept of, well, anything with circuits, anything that's more advanced than wooden weaponry is too advanced. But it raises a really interesting question of, well, technology is really just applying knowledge. And so if anyone's able to use their mind at all, then they have used technology. And the Mandarin can't really grasp this. So when someone questions him, when someone's kind of like thinking outside of a cardboard box, the Mandarin gets really frustrated about it, and he completely loses his cool. And that's really interesting. And you don't have the Iron Man and Mandarin kind of like come to a head with those ideas of the Mandarin being against advancement and Iron Man saying, well, you don't really comprehend advancement because even your empire was an advancement over some other empire. You don't really get those two to battle those ideas out, but it's definitely seeded all the way through, and it gets more of a development when you get to the last few issues of the run after Hands of the Mandarin. The unfortunate thing about the Hands of the Mandarin story is that it just reeks of too many 90s cliches. There's just so much going on here with like War Machine and samurai armor, and everything's got to be extreme. And you got like U.S. agent running around being all really crude, and you've got like scantily clad Scarlet Witch, and just it feels. And then there's lots of cursing for no reason. It just feels too 90s, and it's hard to enjoy for that. Now, the cool thing, though, is that Kaminski is able to kind of push it in a more interesting and a much better direction as we keep going, because he's able to kind of correct and acknowledge the history of Iron Man and putting it all into a clear character evolution as opposed to just a writer's run. So throughout Hands of the Mandarin, throughout the last few issues, there were constant references to things as far back as 115 and as recent as like 270. So Kaminski's really got a sense of what the world of Iron Man has been evolving like, and he's constantly referencing and pushing things and making sure that this is about the character and his growth and not about the different paradigms of writers or the decades that the runs were written in. Because you get this Cold War story where now that the Cold War has ended, Crimson Dynamo and Iron Man are allies, and Titanium Man can't take that. Although it's weird that Titanium Man's alive, considering that Tony killed him in the Armor Wars arc, but whatever. But Titanium Man can't take that, and so there's a nice commentary of the world's come a long way, and so has Iron Man. And it's not about the fact that time hasn't passed, and we have to kind of just slide things forward to make it seem like they all just happened a few months ago. But like a nice meta acknowledgement of in 30 years, look at how far this character has grown. And every now and then we get these great exchanges where Tony references something from the past and they give you the issue number, and it's great having read all that stuff to kind of get a sense of like, well, yeah, I do remember when Tony was just dealing with this, and now he's back to dealing with this, and he hasn't really come a long way, but he's understanding that. Issue 313, which is right after Hands of the Mandarin, is probably one of the best comics Englishes I've ever read, where Tony goes to an AA meeting, and he has this speech about how the alcohol has been with him since he was a kid, and that it wasn't that his dad was a bad person, but that he would do anything to impress him. So the alcoholism thing's been there forever, and he makes references to all of the past stories where he's dealt with alcoholism, and it's very much about his dealing with isolation versus companionship, and when you need people and when you don't, and at the same time thinking about what does alcohol mean for him. He's not drinking it because he gets obsessive, he gets addicted to it. And he's always an alcoholic, but what was the drink substituting for? What was the drink covering up, and what were the feelings inside of him that led him to fill the void with alcohol? And it's just kind of a great moment of self-awareness by the end. And it's an absolutely fantastic issue. And then the final stuff you get is with Tony's old mentor, a physics professor that taught him everything he knew, that helped him through life, that helped him understand like the questioning nature and the ability to reason things beyond just what you already know. Who gets Alzheimer's, and he loses his great mind that Tony appreciated him for. But he thinks Tony's out to get him, and he transforms into this villain called Slag. And they have a really great emotional battle near the end where Tony just has to kind of destabilize him, and it sucks for Tony because this is the guy that that gave him a sense of worth. And now that he's kind of found one on his own, he doesn't want to lose the thing that drifted away and pushed him in this direction to begin with. It's really fascinating stuff. It's really fantastic at that point. There's just not a lot wrong here. All the way through, it's really Tony growing, and it's him overcoming several battles, because you get the defeat of the Mandarin, but you also get Tony's kind of defeat of alcoholism. He's still an alcoholic. When you're an alcoholic, you always are, and it's just a matter of how long between your drinks. But Tony beat it in the sense that he's able to recover, that he's able to find an identity outside of that for himself. And it's a really great triumph for him that he's able to take defeat when he drank because of Vortex, and with such grace. He doesn't blame himself for it. He's not depressed over it. That he's able to kind of finally step out of the manic depressant behavior. And a lot of that just comes to the head of the idea that technology is just evolving thought, and Tony is the embodiment of technology. It's not that he's more machine than man, or more man than machine. It's that he's able to think of ideas and come up with uses for them and push them forward, whether that's him as a person or as technological institutions. And he realizes that Stark Enterprise's direction is to go there, that it's to go to the future, in the sense that we just evolve ideas, and not that technology as a concrete electronic kind of thing. I don't bring up Heidegger nearly enough, but it's kind of a Heideggerian sense of ready hand and present hand, and the Mandarin being more along the lines of that distinction is damaging, that we should take nature as ready at hand instead of, or we should take nature as present at hand as opposed to ready at hand. And Tony embodying the ready at hand is kind of an abomination of all of that. And then Tony saying that, well, there's not really much of a distinction anyway, because nature is still sort of built as an evolving entity. And that's actually a great way to think about it, because then Tony doesn't get stagnated as one type of person or the other. The other thing I want to mention is Kaminski's able to correct some of the worst things in Iron Man's history. Like we mentioned, the really bad love interest romance that he had in John Byrne's run with the Dragon Seed Saga. And then that character makes a reappearance here, and her husband dies because of the Mandarin's anti-technology field, and the life support that was keeping him alive shuts down. And then Tony realizes that, look, I'm sorry that I came on to you the way I did back when we last met. It was just that at that point my brain wasn't in such a place that I thought any attention was romantic attention. And I don't really have feelings for you, so I'm sorry I came on the way I am, but maybe we can still be friends. And it's a really great way to retroactively correct how weird that story played. Tony is finally over the whole paralysis thing, so he's finally got a sense of self-worth back, and it's not that he overcame being paralyzed mentally. It's more of just he's able to find a point to his life, and he's not constantly depressed the way he was in the wheelchair, and it makes a really good case for Tony's overcoming, because at this point Captain America is losing the super soldier serum, so Tony has to use the same technology that allowed him to move on Captain America, and Captain America is saying that I've always wanted to be the perfect human being that I am, just physically what the human body is capable of, and now I'm not anymore. And then Tony says, well, that's not really the case, because this is still the human nature pushing you to a place, and the fact that Tony reassures Captain America as opposed to Captain America reassuring Tony is just a great reversal, especially considering the last wave of issues when those two talked, and they had such separate ideologies, but they come together to the same conclusion. Last thing I want to mention, or actually two more things really quick, is the Mandarin gets reincarnated, or stays alive as a janitor at Stark Enterprises, and there's a weird hint to maybe he'll be back, maybe he won't, but that's really strange, and I don't know how that happened. The other thing is that the art is really inconsistent all the way through. Some issues are drawn really well, other issues are drawn horrendously 90s, other issues are just okay, and it's kind of hard to read because of that. And so I know this won't be everyone's cup of tea, because it's not all collected in trade, and even if it was, it would be hard to get into certain stories just because of the way the art is. But it is really good stuff all the way through. So I advise to kind of look past the art. overall, this is just really good stuff, and I'm really glad that I had a chance to read all of Len Kaminski stuff, because he's kind of the unsung hero of Iron Man, and his run is just as good as anything McElhenney, Layton, John Byrne, way better than John Byrne, and almost as good as what Dennis O'Neil did. And despite the crossover in the middle with the Hands of the Mandarin, I think all the way through this is just really fantastic stuff. And if you ended Iron Man with issue 319 or 318, I feel like that could have been a good cap off. So thanks everybody for watching. Let me know what you think of the arc or Iron Man, or whether you agree or disagree with me. And make sure to click the links in the description for my previous Iron Man reviews, and to follow me on Twitter, where I talk about anything and everything in 140 character bursts. Thanks everybody for watching, and I'll see you next time.